Hi, my name is Brian Benson with James Bean Estate Sales in Oklahoma City, and today I'm here to talk to you about probably one of the most famous statues ever created, and that statue is called the Thinker. And everybody's familiar with the Thinker statue. It's actually so famous it's actually become almost the international symbol for philosophy. And the odd thing is, for a statue that is this famous, very few people really know any of the real history about it or any of the facts about it, right down to, who is it, what is he thinking, and really, why is he actually looking at his feet? So I want to explain to you kind of the history behind it, which I've always found the history is actually much more fascinating than the piece itself. So we have to go back to 1880. So in 1880, Rodin, who is the sculptor of the Thinker, was actually commissioned to do a doorway for a brand new museum. And this museum was going to be fabulous, and they wanted him to do the main door. And this doorway was 20 foot tall, 12 foot wide, and about 3 foot deep. And they let him pick the theme, and for the theme that he selected, he picked Dantes Inferno. So he's made a massive sculpture, which was going to depict Dante at the very top, which was going to be the Thinker, looking down on hell, which were going to be the doors, and you would pass through these doors, which meant you were passing through hell on the way into the museum. And at the very crown, which is where the Thinker statue, which at the time, like I said, was called the Poet. The poet represents Dante, and he's looking down into hell and onto all the people as they pass back and forth, casting judgment upon everybody. Unfortunately, this museum never got built, and Rodin, disappointed that he wasn't going to get to have his feature, decided he was going to build these gates anyway. So for the next 37 years, until he died, he worked on these gates. He'd add pieces, take off pieces, work with it. He never really technically finished them and never made them built where they were functional, but he worked on it continuously until he died. Now, when he died, he left his entire estate to the French government, who they, in turn, came in, actually went ahead and cast the gates, and these gates can now be seen at various Rodin museums around the world. There's about 10 of these gates in existence, and they literally represent the most monumental piece of work he has ever done in his entire life. So back to the Thinker statue, which, like I said, originally was called the Poet. Well, the gates weren't going to get made, and about 8 years after he was commissioned to do the gates, he decided to start exhibiting the Thinker by itself, and had earned the nickname the Thinker because it looked very much like Michelangelo's statue called the Thinker also. And people started calling it the Thinker kind of as a nickname, and this went on, and he would exhibit it because, the statue was about 2 to 3 foot tall, and it was easy to transport if he was doing shows. Well, 24 years after this was created, he decides to do a standalone piece. And he actually took other pieces out of this whole gate concept. He ended up doing 12 other statues that were all standalone pieces that all became works of art by themselves. They all became very famous. Nothing as famous as the Thinker statue, but they were all famous in their own right. The difficulty was when he decided to do that, he had to change a lot of stuff on the Thinker statue. Because the Thinker statue originally stood way out and looked almost directly down on everybody and on the gates. The problem was, it looked really out of proportion when you actually saw it by itself without the statue, or without the actual gates accompanying it. So what he had to do was he actually took the piece apart, re-sculpted it, actually made it sit a little bit more erect. He also had to shorten the thighs because the thighs were so long because by the perspective, he had to change all these perspective points from the perspective's point of view. He actually made the legs shorter because on the original piece, the knees would actually, if you pulled them all the way up, they would actually be around where his ears were. So he had to change all of these because, it just wasn't in perspective at the way it was being viewed. So there ended up being 2 different versions of the Thinker that he created. There was the original version, which was made for the gates, and then you have the later version, which is actually made to be a standalone piece, and that was 24 years after the gates were created. So anyway, this became one of his most famous pieces. It earned the name the Thinker because once it was no longer with the rest of the gates of hell, it no longer made sense really to call it the Poet because it didn't have any of that imagery with the gate associated, so people would even have a frame of reference for why it would even be called the Poet. And all of his other pieces, and this one, became very famous, which is very ironic considering how famous these pieces are. But they were actually just small pieces of a much larger installation that is much more monumental, much more fabulous, but actually lies kind of in obscurity. Anyway, if you'd like to come and purchase your own Thinker statue at this week's estate sale, we have several, and you may come and buy your own little piece of history at this week's estate sale. Or if you'd like other information about having your own estate sale in the Oklahoma City area, feel free to give us a call or visit our website at jamesbeanestatesales.com.